The pistol trembled in Eleanor's bloodied hands as she faced the man who'd bought her like cattle. "You're my first," she whispered, her finger on the trigger. Behind her, Jake Thornton, the outlaw who'd sworn to make her his last, lay, bleeding in the desert sand. This is the story of how a terrified girl became a woman of steel, how a broken gunslinger found redemption, and how two souls forged an unbreakable bond in the crucible of the Old West. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the black velvet sky when Eleanor May Hutchkin slipped out of her stepfather's ranch house for the last time. Her ribs ached with each shallow breath, a parting gift from Silas Hutchkin's fists the night before. But it wasn't the bruises that drove her into the desert. It was the deed of sale he'd signed, trading her to Big Jim Calhoun for $200 and a prize bull. She pressed her back against the rough wooden siding, listening to the snores drifting from within. The old mare Buttercup waited where Eleanor had tied her behind the chicken coop, saddlebags hastily packed with whatever she could steal, hardtack a canteen 37 cents, and her late father's Colt 45, a gun she'd held but never fired. "Please God," she whispered to the stars, "if you're listening, don't let them find me until I'm too far gone to bring back." The Nevada desert stretched before her like an ocean of sage and shadow. She'd heard tales of what happened to women alone in such places: bandits, Apaches, mountain lions, rattlesnakes. But none of those dangers compared to what awaited her in Big Jim Calhoun's bed. She'd seen the bruises on his previous wife, heard the whispers about how she'd died. Fell down the stairs, they said, though everyone knew Big Jim's ranch house had only one floor. Eleanor mounted Buttercup with difficulty, her split lip throbbing as she gritted her teeth. 20 years old, and she'd never been more than 10 miles from Carson Creek. Now she pointed the mare's nose toward the distant mountains and kicked her into motion. The first hours passed in a blur of fear and determination. Every snap of a twig made her heart race. Every shadow could be Silas or Big Jim's men coming to drag her back. She rode hard, pushing poor Buttercup until foam flecked the mare's neck. When the sun began to paint the eastern horizon pink and gold, Eleanor finally stopped at a cluster of rocks. Her hands shook as she unscrewed the canteen. One sip, she told herself, make it last. But the water was warm and brackish, and her throat was so dry she ended up taking 3 long pulls before forcing herself to stop. "We did it, girl, come," she murmured to Buttercup, stroking the mare's sweaty neck. "We're free." Freedom, she would soon learn, came with its own price. By noon, the desert had transformed from her salvation into her potential tomb. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the sand into a shimmering hell. Buttercup plodded forward, head hanging low. Eleanor had shed her heavy wool dress hours ago, riding now in just her chemise and petticoat, but still the heat was suffocating. She'd thought she knew which way to go, toward the mountains, toward California. Maybe where a woman might find work in a boarding house or as a seamstress. But all the rocks looked the same. All the Joshua trees seemed to mock her with their twisted arms, pointing in every direction at once. "Water," she croaked, reaching for the canteen. Empty. When had she finished it? She couldn't remember. The sun had baked her brain into uselessness. That's when she saw him. At first, Eleanor thought it was a mirage, her heat-addled mind conjuring up the last thing she'd see before death claimed her. A lone rider on the ridge above, motionless as a statue, watching her. The sun was behind him, turning him into a dark silhouette, but she could make out the shape of a wide-brimmed hat and the outline of guns on his hips. Terror and hope warred in her chest. If he was one of Big Jim's men, she was finished. But if he wasn't... The rider began to descend his horse, picking its way carefully down the rocky slope. As he drew closer, Eleanor could make out more details. Tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster coat despite the heat. His face was shadowed by his hat, but she caught a glimpse of dark stubble and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Eleanor's hand fumbled for her father's pistol, though she doubted she could hit the broadside of a barn, let alone a moving target. "No need for that, ma'am," the stranger said, his voice deep and rough as desert stone. He stopped his horse, a magnificent black stallion, about 20 feet away. "Name's Jake Thornton. You look like you could use some help." I don't need anything from you," Eleanor lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just fine on my own." Jake Thornton tilted his head and she caught a glimpse of a wry smile. That's so. Well, pardon me for saying, but your horse is about ready to drop. You're burned redder than a tomato, and unless I miss my guess, you're out of water. He reached for his saddlebag, moving slowly, deliberately. I've got plenty to spare. Pride warred with desperation. Pride lost. How do I know you won't? Eleanor couldn't finish the sentence, but Jake seemed to understand. If I wanted to hurt you, ma'am, I could have done it from up on that ridge. Or I could have just waited another hour for the sun to do it for me. He pulled out a canteen and tossed it gently in her direction. It landed in the sand near Buttercup's hooves. Drink, your horse too. Then we can discuss what a lady in her undergarments is doing alone in the middle of nowhere. Eleanor's face burned with embarrassment as she remembered her state of undress, but thirst won over modesty. She dismounted on shaking legs, grabbed the canteen, and drank deeply. The water was cool, impossibly cool, and it tasted like salvation. Slowly, Jake warned. Too much, too fast, and you'll make yourself sick. She forced herself to stop, then poured some into her palm for Buttercup. The mare lipped at it gratefully. Thank you, Eleanor managed. You're running from something, Jake observed. It wasn't a question. That's none of your business. Fair enough. He shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. But if you keep heading the way you're going, you'll be dead by sunset. The nearest water is 3 days that way, he pointed east, and you're headed straight into the Funeral Mountains. Eleanor's heart sank. Funeral Mountains. Even the name promised death. Where were you trying to go? Jake asked. Away, she whispered. Just away. Something in Jake's expression softened, though his face remained largely hidden. I know that feeling. Tell you what. There's a water hole about 4 hours north. I was headed there anyway. You can follow if you like. After that, you go your way, I'll go mine. Eleanor studied him, this dangerous-looking stranger, offering kindness in the desert. Every instinct screamed that trusting him was foolish. But what choice did she have? Why would you help me? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. Maybe because once upon a time someone helped me when I was running, or maybe because the desert's cruel enough without us adding to it. He turned his horse. You coming or not? Eleanor looked back the way she'd come. Somewhere behind her, Big Jim Calhoun was probably already mounting a search party. Ahead lay the unknown in the company of a man who wore his guns like most men wore suspenders, naturally, comfortably, dangerously. My name is... She hesitated, then lied. Mary Smith. Jake's shoulders shook slightly. Was he laughing? Pleased to meet you, Mary Smith. Now you might want to put that dress back on before you burn any worse. And keep that pistol holstered unless you mean to use it. Nothing makes me more nervous than an untrained hand with a loaded gun. As Eleanor retrieved her dress from Buttercup's saddlebag, she wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Jake Thornton moved like a man comfortable with violence, spoke like someone who'd seen too much, and yet he'd offered her water and safe passage. The dress was miserable in the heat, but it did protect her skin. She remounted Buttercup with effort, her muscles screaming in protest. They'd been riding for less than a day, and already her body was failing her. How did people survive out here? Jake set a steady but manageable pace, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was keeping up. He didn't try to make conversation, which suited Eleanor fine. She was too exhausted and scared to maintain any pretense of being Mary Smith under scrutiny. The landscape gradually changed as they rode. The flat, sandy expanses gave way to rockier terrain spotted with larger Joshua trees and occasional clusters of barrel cacti. Jake navigated it all with the confidence of a man who'd spent years in the wilderness. After 2 hours, Eleanor couldn't stay silent any longer. Are you from around here? No. Where then? Texas originally. Been a while since I called any place home, though. What do you do for work, I mean? Jake turned in his saddle to look at her, and for the first time she got a clear view of his face. Weathered, mid-30s maybe, with dark eyes that held shadows she couldn't read. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. Handsome in a dangerous sort of way. Whatever needs doing, he said simply, then faced forward again. Eleanor knew better than to press. Men who gave vague answers about their work usually had good reasons. She thought of the way he wore those guns, the easy confidence with which he moved through hostile terrain. Jake Thornton was either a lawman or an outlaw, and something told her it wasn't the former. They stopped once to rest the horses in the shade of a large rock formation. Jake shared some jerky from his pack, tough and salty, but wonderful to Eleanor's empty stomach. He showed her how to check Buttercup's hooves for stones and how to read the horse's condition. "She's tough, your mare," he said, running an expert hand along Buttercup's legs. "But she's not built for this kind of travel. You'll need a different mount if you plan to keep running." "I don't have money for another horse." "Then you'd better hope whoever's chasing you gives up quick." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What makes you think someone's chasing me?" Jake gave her a look that said he wasn't fooled. "Women don't ride into the desert in their night clothes for the fun of it, and that bruise on your jaw didn't come from falling off your horse." Instinctively, Eleanor touched her face where Silas had struck her. "It's not what you think." "I'm not thinking anything, Mary Smith. Your business is your own. But if armed men come asking if I've seen you, what should I tell them?" "Tell them—" Eleanor swallowed hard. "Tell them you haven't seen anyone." "I can do that, but it might help to know what kind of trouble I'm lying to." Eleanor weighed her options. This man had helped her, but that didn't mean she could trust him with the truth. "My stepfather wanted me to marry someone. I disagreed." "And this someone he the type to come looking—" "Yes." Jake nodded slowly. "Big man wealthy used to getting what he wants." "How did you—" "It's an old story, ma'am. Seen it play out a dozen times." He stood dusting off his pants. "We should keep moving." As they mounted up again, Eleanor caught Jake checking his guns, a casual gesture that somehow carried weight. "Mr. Thornton, I don't want any killing on my account." "Nobody said anything about killing, but if trouble comes, I like to be prepared." He paused. "And it's just Jake. Mr. Thornton was my father, and he's long dead." They rode in silence after that, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. Eleanor found herself studying Jake's back, the way he sat his horse, the constant vigilance in how he scanned their surroundings. This was a man who expected trouble, who lived with one eye on the horizon and one hand near his gun. Finally, as the sky began to turn orange and purple, Jake pointed ahead. "There!" Eleanor could hardly believe her eyes. Green vegetation clustered around what looked like a small pool of water fed by some underground spring. It was an oasis, in the truest sense, a miracle in the middle of hell. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. They dismounted, and Eleanor nearly fell to her knees at the water's edge. It was clear and cold, and she wanted nothing more than to immerse herself completely. But Jake caught her arm. "Check for snakes first, and don't drink too much at once, no matter how thirsty you are." He was right, of course. Eleanor saw the wisdom in his caution, even as her body screamed for relief. They watered the horses first, then filled their canteens. Only then did Jake step back and gesture for her to drink her fill. The water was everything she'd dreamed. She splashed it on her face, her arms not caring that Jake was watching. Let him see her desperation. She was past pride now. "There's a cave up in those rocks," Jake said, pointing to the cliff face above the spring. "Good shelter for the night. Defensible, too, if your friends come calling." "They're not my friends." Figure of speech. As the sun set, they made camp in the cave Jake had indicated. It was shallow but dry, with enough room for both of them to sleep without being too close. Jake built a small fire at the entrance, just enough to ward off the desert's nighttime chill. Eleanor watched him work, efficient and practiced. "You've done this before." "More times than I can count." "Why, what keeps you moving?" Jake looked at her across the fire, his face half in shadow. "Same thing that's got you running, I expect. Sometimes the past has teeth, and the only thing to do is stay ahead of it." "Does it ever stop chasing?" "Not in my experience, but you learn to live with it. Like a snake in your bedroll, long as you know it's there, you can avoid getting bit." Eleanor shivered, despite the fire's warmth. "That's not very comforting." "Wasn't meant to be. The desert doesn't deal in comfort, Mary Smith. It deals in truth. And the truth is, you're not equipped for this. That pistol you're carrying, you ever fired it?" "No." "Can you hunt, track, find water without help?" "No." "Then you've got two choices. Find somewhere civilized to hide, or learn real quick how to survive." Eleanor lifted her chin. Then teach me. Jake raised an eyebrow. I said I'd get you to water. I didn't say anything about please. The word came out more desperate than she intended. I can't go back. I won't. But you're right. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll die out here without help. That's not my problem. No, it's not. But you helped me anyway. Why? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. You reminded me of someone. Who? Doesn't matter. She's dead now. The weight of those words settled between them like a stone. Eleanor wanted to ask more, but something in Jake's expression warned her off. I'm sorry, she said instead. Yeah, well, sorry doesn't bring people back. He stood abruptly. Get some sleep. I'll keep first watch. Watch for what? Everything. Eleanor curled up on the cave floor using her folded dress as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. She watched Jake's silhouette at the cave entrance, keeping vigil against the night. Who was this man who helped strangers but carried such darkness? What was he running from? Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Others answered their calls, echoing off the canyon walls. It sounded like the desert itself was mourning. Jake, she whispered. Yeah. Thank you for the water, for everything. He didn't respond for so long she thought he might not have heard. Then quietly, don't thank me yet. This desert has a way of making you pay for every kindness. You might not like the price. Eleanor closed her eyes, trying not to think about what that might mean. She'd made her choice when she fled Carson Creek. Whatever came next, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. She was wrong, of course, but she wouldn't know that until the riders came. The sound of horses woke her. Jake's hand was over her mouth before she could gasp, his body tense beside her. 6 riders, he whispered in her ear, coming from the south. Friends of yours. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. 6 riders could only mean one thing. Big Jim had sent a proper search party. Stay quiet. Stay down, Jake instructed, then moved to the cave entrance, melting into the shadows. The voices carried on the still night air. Eleanor recognized Dutch McCready, Big Jim's foreman. They came this way, boss. Tracks lead right to the spring. Then where the hell are they? That was Big Jim himself, his voice like gravel in a tin cup. Eleanor's whole body went cold. Could have moved on, another voice suggested. No, Big Jim said. Their horses would need rest. They're here somewhere. Jake stepped out of the shadows so smoothly that several horses spooked. His hands rested casually on his gun butts. Evening, gentlemen. Something I can help you with? We're looking for someone, Big Jim said, recovering from his surprise. Eleanor couldn't see him from her hiding spot, but she could picture his face, broad and mean with piggy eyes that undressed every woman they saw. A woman, young blonde riding a bay mare. Haven't seen anyone like that, Jake said easily. Been here 2 days, nobody's come by. You're lying, Dutch McCready dismounted, hand moving to his sidearm. Fresh tracks all around this spring. 2 horses, not 1. My spare mount. She's picketed up in the rocks. Mind if we take a look around? Big Jim asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. Actually, I do mind, Jake said. This is my camp and you gentlemen weren't invited. I suggest you water your horses and move on. Eleanor heard the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. Mister, you don't seem to understand, Big Jim said. That woman belongs to me, bought and paid for. She's my property, and I mean to collect her. Funny thing about property, Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet. Last I checked, the 13th Amendment had something to say about owning people. Don't get smart with me, stranger. You don't know who you're dealing with. No, you don't know who you're dealing with. Jake's voice had dropped even lower, carrying a threat that made Eleanor shiver. I'm trying to be polite here, but you're testing my patience. I said I haven't seen your woman. Now move on before this gets unpleasant. There was a tense silence. Eleanor held her breath, her hand creeping to her father's pistol. Boys, Big Jim said finally. I think our friend here needs a lesson in respect. Eleanor heard the whisper of leather as guns cleared holsters. She didn't think, didn't plan, she just acted. Scrambling from the cave, she pointed her pistol at the group of riders with shaking hands. Stop, she shouted. "Leave him alone!" Every eye turned to her. Big Jim's face split into a grin that made her stomach turn. "Well, well. Hello, Eleanor. Your stepfather's been worried sick. He sold me to you like cattle. Now that's an ugly way to put it. We had a business arrangement. You're going to be my wife, Eleanor. It's all legal and proper. I'll die first. That can be arranged too." Dutch said, his gun now pointed at Jake. "After we deal with your friend here." Jake hadn't moved, hadn't even looked at Eleanor. His focus remained on the men in front of him. 6 against 1. Those aren't sporting odds. "Who said anything about sport?" Big Jim laughed. "Boys kill him." What happened next occurred so fast, Eleanor could barely follow it. Jake's hands moved like lightning, both guns clearing leather, in a motion too quick to see. The night exploded with gunfire. Dutch McCready spun from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Another man cried out and fell. Jake dove and rolled, coming up behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. "Get to cover!" he shouted at Eleanor. She stumbled backward, still clutching her father's pistol uselessly. Bullets sparked off the rocks around her. Someone grabbed her arm. Big Jim, his face twisted with rage. "You little bitch! You're coming with me if I have to drag you." Eleanor did the only thing she could think of. She pressed the pistol against his belly and pulled the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand, the sound deafening. Big Jim's eyes went wide with surprise. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then back at Eleanor. You shot me," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. He released her arm and staggered backward. Eleanor stood frozen, the smoking gun still in her hand, unable to process what she'd just done. "Eleanor, move!" Jake's voice cut through her shock. She dove behind a cluster of rocks as more gunfire erupted. Jake was pinned down, 4 riders still mounted and shooting, but something had changed in the dynamic. Their leader was down, wounded, possibly dying. The fight had gone out of them. "Boss is hit," one of them shouted. "We need to get him to a doctor." "Forget the girl, another yelled. "Let's go!" They grabbed Big Jim, who was still conscious, but barely, and threw him across a saddle. In moments, they were galloping away into the night, leaving their dead behind. Jake emerged from cover guns still drawn, watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Only then did he turn to Eleanor. She was sitting on the ground, staring at the pistol in her lap. "I shot him. I shot a man." "You did what you had to do." Jake knelt beside her gently, taking the gun from her numb fingers. "He would have done worse to you." "Is he dead?" "Maybe. Gut shots are bad, but if they get him to a doctor quick enough..." Jake shrugged. "Either way, you bought yourself some time." "They'll come back." "Probably, but not tonight. And by tomorrow we'll be long gone." Eleanor looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. His coat was torn where a bullet had grazed him, and there was blood on his cheek from a rock splinter. But his hands were steady, his expression calm. This was a man who'd been in gunfights before, who'd killed before. "You're an outlaw," she said. It wasn't a question. "Does it matter?" She thought about it. This outlaw had just risked his life for her, a stranger who'd lied about her name. "No, I suppose it doesn't." Jake helped her to her feet. "We need to move. Can you ride?" "Yes." "Good. We'll take their horses, ours are too tired. Leave everything you don't absolutely need." As Eleanor gathered her few possessions, she realized her old life was truly over. She'd shot Big Jim Calhoun. Even if he lived, she was now a wanted woman. There was no going back. "Where will we go?" she asked. Jake looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like approval in his eyes. "First we get distance. Then I'll teach you what you wanted to learn how to survive. Because Mary Smith, or Eleanor, or whoever you really are, you just declared war on powerful men. Your education starts now." Eleanor nodded, surprising herself with her steady voice. "My name is Eleanor May Hutchkins, and I'm ready to learn." Jake almost smiled. "Well then, Eleanor May Hutchkins, let's see if you've got what it takes to stay alive in the devil's own country." They rode out into the darkness, 2 fugitives now bound by violence and necessity. Behind them, the dead men's eyes stared sightlessly at the stars. The desert had claimed its due, but Eleanor knew it would demand more before this was over. The desert always did. The horses they'd taken from Big Jim's men were superior to anything Eleanor had ever ridden. Her mount, a strong sorrel gelding, moved through the darkness with sure feet, while she clung to the saddle horn, still shaking from what had transpired at the spring. Jake rode ahead on a spotted gray, leading them through the terrain that seemed impossible to navigate in the moonlight, yet he never hesitated, never slowed, except to check that she still followed. They rode until dawn painted the eastern mountains purple and gold, pushing the horses hard but not recklessly. When Jake finally called a halt in a narrow canyon, Eleanor nearly fell from the saddle. Her legs had gone numb hours ago, and her hands were cramped into claws from gripping the reins. "No fire," Jake said, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. "They might have someone good enough to track us, and smoke can be seen for miles." Eleanor managed to slide off her horse without collapsing, though it was a near thing. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She watched Jake tend to the horses with practiced efficiency, checking their legs, their hooves, rationing water from the canteens they'd filled at the spring. "You need to learn this," he said without looking at her. "A man on foot in this desert is a dead man. Your horse is your life." "Show me," Eleanor said, forcing herself to pay attention despite her exhaustion. Jake glanced at her, perhaps surprised by her determination. He demonstrated how to check for stones in the hooves, how to spot signs of lameness, how to ration water to keep the animal going without killing it. Eleanor's hands shook as she mimicked his actions, but she forced herself to focus, to remember. "You ever kill a man before?" Jake asked suddenly. The question hit her like cold water. "No. It'll eat at you if you let it. The first one always does." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "But you remember why you did it. Remember what he would have done to you. That's how you live with it." "How many men have you killed?" Jake's expression darkened. "Enough to know it never gets easier, just necessary sometimes." They rested through the heat of the day, taking shelter in the shade of the canyon walls. Jake showed her how to clean and reload her father's pistol, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger. "You got lucky last night," he said bluntly. "Point-blank range couldn't miss, but if you're going to carry iron, you need to know how to use it proper." Eleanor practiced dry firing, getting used to the weight of the gun, the motion of drawing it from where she'd tucked it in her waistband. Jake corrected her grip, her stance with a patience she hadn't expected from such a hard man. "Why are you helping me?" she asked during one of their brief breaks. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the shimmering heat beyond their shelter. "Maybe because I've got nothing better to do. Maybe because I don't like men like Big Jim Calhoun. Or maybe—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter. You need help, I'm here. Don't read more into it than that." But Eleanor sensed there was more, something in the way his eyes went distant sometimes, as if seeing ghosts only he could perceive. She thought of what he'd said about her, reminding him of someone who was dead now. Had he failed to protect her? Is that why he was so determined to help a stranger? As the sun began its descent, Jake rose and stretched. "Time to move. We'll travel at night from now on, rest during the day. Harder to track us that way and easier on the horses." "Where are we going?" "There's a town about 3 days north, Oro Grande. Not much more than a mining camp, but they won't ask questions if we don't cause trouble. You can catch a stage from there, head to California, or wherever you plan to go." "What about you?" "I'll move on. Always do." They mounted up as darkness fell, and Eleanor found the night riding less terrifying than before. Jake taught her to read the stars to find the North Star and use it as a guide. He showed her how to listen to the desert, to distinguish between the normal sounds of night creatures and the silence that meant danger. On the second night they encountered their first real test. Jake pulled up suddenly, holding up a hand for silence. Eleanor stopped beside him, straining to hear whatever had alerted him. "Riders," he whispered, "coming from the east. Get behind those rocks and keep quiet." They dismounted quickly, leading the horses into a cluster of boulders. Jake drew one of his pistols, checking the cylinder with practiced ease. Eleanor gripped her own gun, though her palms were sweating so badly she feared she'd drop it. The riders came into view, 4 men moving slowly, studying the ground, even in the moonlight. "Apache scouts," Jake mouthed to her, and Eleanor's blood ran cold. She'd heard stories of what Apache did to white women they captured, but the scouts passed by without stopping, disappearing into the darkness as silently as they'd come. Only when Jake finally relaxed did Eleanor realize she'd been holding her breath. "They weren't looking for us," he said quietly. "Probably tracking someone else. Or something else. The Apache know this desert better than anyone. If they'd wanted to find us, they would have. Then why didn't they? Because we're not their concern. The Apache have bigger problems than two lone travelers. The Army's been pushing them hard, trying to force them onto reservations. They've got no quarrel with us unless we give them one." They continued on, but the encounter had shaken Eleanor. The desert suddenly seemed full of invisible threats, dangers she couldn't see or understand. How did Jake live like this constantly? Vigilant, constantly ready for violence? As if reading her thoughts, he spoke. "You're wondering how anyone stays sane out here." "Yes." "You don't, not really. The desert changes you, strips away everything soft, everything unnecessary. You become something else, something harder. Question is whether you can live with what you become." "And can you live with what you've become?" Jake was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "Some days. Other days I think about eating a bullet and having done with it." The casual way he spoke of suicide shocked her. "That's a sin." "So is killing. But we do what we have to do to survive. God can sort it out later." They rode on in silence after that, but Eleanor found herself studying Jake's back, the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself. What had driven him to such darkness? What ghosts haunted him? Near dawn, they came upon the remains of a wagon train. 3 wagons burned down to their iron frames, scattered bones that might have been oxen or horses, or people. Eleanor's stomach turned. "Indians?" she asked. "Maybe. Or bandits dressed as Indians. Happens more than you'd think." Jake dismounted, studying the scene with a practiced eye. "This is old, though. Months, maybe a year. Those poor people. They were probably dead before the fire. Small mercy." He remounted, but not before Eleanor saw him pocket something from near one of the wagons. "Come on. No good dwelling on the dead." They made camp in a box canyon as the sun rose, and Jake surprised her by building a small fire. "We're far enough from pursuit now, and you need hot food. Can't keep going on jerky and hardtack." He produced a small pot from his saddlebags and set about making coffee and beans. The smell made Eleanor's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" Jake asked. Eleanor had to think about it. 3 days ago, maybe 4. Everything's blurred together. That's the desert. Time works different out here. Days feel like weeks, weeks like days. He handed her a tin plate of beans. "Eat slow. Your stomach's not used to being empty." The food was simple but delicious. Eleanor couldn't remember anything ever tasting so good. As she ate, she watched Jake tend to their gear with mechanical precision. Everything had its place, its purpose. No wasted motion, no unnecessary items. "You've been running a long time," she observed. "What makes you say that?" "The way you live. Like you could leave everything behind in a heartbeat." Jake looked at her with something like respect. "You're observant. That's good. Might keep you alive." He poured himself coffee, the steam rising in the cool morning air. 7 years. Been 7 years since I had anything resembling a normal life. What happened? The war happened, then what came after? He stared into his coffee as if it held answers. "I had a wife. Maria. Beautiful kind, too good for the likes of me. We had a little spread in Texas, nothing fancy, but it was ours." Eleanor held her breath, afraid that any sound might stop him from continuing. "The war took me away for 4 years. When I came back, everything had changed. Carpetbaggers and local strongmen divided up the territory like vultures on a carcass. A man named Samuel Carson wanted our land, offered to buy it for 1/10 of what it was worth. When I refused," Jake's jaw tightened. "He had his men visit while I was in town. They said Maria fought back, said she made them kill her." "Oh, Jake." "I found her in our bedroom. They'd done things. Before or after she died, I don't know. Don't want to know." His voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I buried her under the oak tree where we'd set our vows. Then I went to see Samuel Carson." Eleanor knew what came next without asking. She could see it in the darkness of Jake's eyes, the weight he carried. Killed him in his own study. His brother too when he tried to stop me, and 2 of his men on the way out. Been running ever since. Carson family's got money influence. They've had bounty hunters on my trail from Texas to California. That's why you understood. About Big Jim. Men like that, they think they can buy anything, anyone. Think their money makes them gods. Jake's hand drifted to his gun. But bullets don't care how rich you are. They slept through the heat of the day, taking turns on watch. Eleanor dozed fitfully, dreaming of burning wagons and dead women under oak trees. When she woke, Jake was sitting at the canyon entrance, silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Bad dreams?" he asked without turning. "Yes. They'll pass. Or you'll get used to them, one or the other." Eleanor moved to sit beside him, careful to maintain some distance. Despite their forced intimacy, Jake still radiated a dangerous energy that made her wary. "Teach me to shoot," she said. "Really shoot, not just point and pray." Jake looked at her. "You sure?" "Once you start down that path, there's no going back. Every skill you learn makes you more dangerous, and dangerous people attract danger." "I'm already attracting danger. Might as well be prepared for it." He nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this my way. You listen, you practice, you don't argue. I say stop, you stop. I say run, you run. Understood?" "Yes." They spent the remaining daylight hours training. Jake set up targets using rocks and broken branches. He taught her to breathe, to squeeze the trigger between heartbeats, to follow through after the shot. Eleanor's arm ached from holding the heavy pistol, but she persisted, determined to prove herself worthy of his time. "You're pulling to the left," Jake corrected, adjusting her stance. "And stop anticipating the recoil. Let it happen." His hand on her arm was steady, impersonal, but Eleanor felt a flutter in her stomach she tried to ignore. This was not the time or place for such feelings. Jake was helping her survive, nothing more. By the time darkness fell and they prepared to ride again, Eleanor had hit more targets than she'd missed. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "You've got steady hands," Jake admitted as they mounted up. "Better than most men I've known. My father taught me to embroider, said steady hands were a lady's virtue." "Your father ever think those steady hands might save your life?" "He died when I was 12, consumption. After that, my mother married Silas, and everything changed." "Stepdaddies," Jake said with disgust. "More trouble than they're worth, most of them." They rode through the night, making good time across relatively flat terrain. Jake continued her education as they traveled, pointing out landmarks, teaching her to recognize water signs, showing her which plants were edible and which would kill you. "See that?" He pointed to a series of scratches on a rock face. "Apache sign. Means water within a day's ride." "How do you know all this?" "Spent 2 years scouting for the army after the war. Learned from the best. An old Apache named Joseph Christianized in working for the whites. He taught me to read the desert like a book." "What happened to him?" "Same thing that happens to all Indians who trust white men. Betrayed, shot in the back by soldiers who thought all Apache were the enemy." The bitterness in Jake's voice was sharp. Eleanor was beginning to understand that his cynicism came from experience, from seeing too much of humanity's darker nature. On the 3rd night, they ran into trouble. Jake sensed it first, pulling up sharp and drawing his gun in one smooth motion. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered. "Smoke. Campfire maybe half a mile ahead. Could be innocent travelers, could be trouble." "What do we do?" "We go around. No sense borrowing trouble." But as they tried to circumvent the camp, a shot rang out, kicking up dust near Jake's horse. More shots followed, and suddenly they were racing through the darkness, bullets whining overhead. "Bandits!" Jake shouted. "Stay low and ride hard." Eleanor pressed herself against her horse's neck, giving the animal its head. She could hear pursuit behind them, men shouting, horses thundering. Jake turned in his saddle, firing back his shots, precise even at full gallop. A rider appeared beside Eleanor, reaching for her reins. Without thinking, she drew her pistol and fired. The man cursed and fell back, clutching his arm. She'd hit him. The realization should have horrified her, but all she felt was fierce satisfaction. Jake led them into a maze of rocks and narrow passages, their horses' hooves echoing off the stone walls. The pursuit sounds grew fainter, then stopped altogether. "Lost them." Jake said, slowing to a walk. Nice shooting back there. I didn't think I just acted. That's good. Thinking gets you killed in a fight. You react or you die. They continued on, but the encounter had changed something. Eleanor no longer felt like a helpless victim. She'd defended herself, drawn blood in her own defense. It was a powerful feeling and a dangerous one. As dawn approached, they crested a rise and saw lights in the distance, Oro Grande such as it was. A collection of ramshackle buildings clustered around a mine shaft, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of machinery carried on the wind. We'll wait for full daylight, Jake said. Towns like this approaching in the dark is a good way to get shot. They made a cold camp in sight of the town, sharing the last of their water and jerky. Eleanor studied Jake's profile in the growing light, memorizing the lines of his face. After tomorrow, they would part ways. She would catch a stage to somewhere, anywhere, and he would disappear into the desert again. I don't want to go to California, she said suddenly. Jake looked at her, eyebrow raised. No, I want you to keep teaching me. I want to learn to survive like you do. This isn't a life, Eleanor. It's just existence. You deserve better. Better? Like being Big Jim's wife, like being any man's property. She shook her head. I'd rather live free in the desert than in a cage in town. You don't know what you're asking. The loneliness, the constant danger, never being able to trust anyone or stay anywhere too long. It hollows you out and makes you into something barely human. You're human, Eleanor said softly. You saved me. That's more human than most. Jake turned away, but not before she saw something flicker in his eyes. Maria used to say things like that. Look where it got her. I'm not Maria. No, Jake agreed, his voice rough. You're not. They entered Oro Grande at mid-morning, drawing stares from the miners and working girls who populated the dusty main street. Jake kept his hands visible but near his guns, projecting an aura of danger that made people step aside. At the general store, he bought supplies with money Eleanor suspected came from the dead men at the spring. Ammunition, dried goods, medical supplies. Enough for 2 people traveling hard. Thought you were putting me on a stage, Eleanor said. Change my mind. If you're fool enough to want this life, I'll teach you. But we do it my way, and when I say it's time to part ways, we part. No arguments. Eleanor's heart leapt, but she kept her expression neutral. Agreed. They were leaving the store when trouble found them again. 3 men stepped out of the saloon, badges glinting on their chests. The one in the lead, a tall man with a drooping mustache, looked from Jake to Eleanor with calculating eyes. Jake Thornton, he said. Thought that might be you. There's a hefty bounty on your head, friend. Jake's stance shifted subtly, ready for violence. Sheriff, I'm not looking for trouble. Neither am I. But $10,000 is a lot of money. The Carson family really wants you bad. The Carson family can go to hell. Maybe so, but their money spends just fine. The sheriff's hand hovered near his gun. You coming peaceful, or do we do this the hard way? Eleanor stepped forward before Jake could respond. Sheriff, this man is my husband. We're just passing through buying supplies for our claim. The sheriff looked at her skeptically. Your husband? And you are Mary Thornton. She lied smoothly. We were married in Carson Creek 3 days ago. Check the register if you don't believe me. Carson Creek. One of the deputies laughed. That's Big Jim Calhoun's town. Heard he got himself shot by some woman he was trying to marry. Eleanor kept her face calm despite her racing heart. I wouldn't know about that. We left right after our wedding. The sheriff studied them both clearly, not believing the story, but perhaps calculating whether the bounty was worth a gunfight in the middle of town. Jake hadn't moved, but Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from him, coiled like a spring. Tell you what, the sheriff said finally. You 2 lovebirds, get on your horses and ride out. Don't come back. I see you again. We'll revisit this conversation. Obliged, Sheriff, Jake said, taking Eleanor's arm. Come on, darling. They walked to their horses with measured steps, Eleanor acutely aware of the guns pointed at their backs. Only when they were mounted and riding out did she release the breath she'd been holding. Quick thinking, Jake said once they were clear of town. Husband, huh? It was all I could think of. Well, Mrs. Thornton, you just made yourself an accessory to murder in the eyes of the law. Still want this life. Eleanor thought about the sheriff's greedy eyes, the casual threat of violence, the way her lie had been the only thing standing between Jake and a noose. Yes, more than ever. Jake shook his head, but she caught the hint of a smile. You're either brave or stupid, Eleanor May Hutchkins. Maybe both. Yeah, Jake agreed, spurring his horse into a lope. Maybe both. They rode away from Oro Grande back into the desert that had become Eleanor's classroom and refuge. Behind them, civilization offered its dubious safety. Ahead lay the unknown, dangerous, and free. Jake had agreed to teach her to show her how to survive in this harsh land. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but it was a life she'd chosen. As they climbed into the hills, Eleanor looked back one last time at the town shrinking in the distance. Somewhere beyond those mountains, Big Jim Calhoun might be dead or alive, might be sending more men after her. It didn't matter. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd fled in the night. She was becoming something else, something harder and more dangerous. Jake had warned her that the desert changed people, stripped them down to their essential nature. Eleanor was beginning to understand what that meant. Each day, each lesson, each moment of danger was remaking her. The woman who'd once spent her days embroidering and dreaming of romance was dying, replaced by someone who could shoot a man, lie to a sheriff, and ride through the night without fear. Where to now? She asked Jake as they crested a ridge. North into the Badlands. If you're going to learn, really learn, we need to go where the civilized world can't follow. And then we see what you're really made of. Eleanor nodded, checking her pistol as Jake had taught her, then settling into her saddle for the long ride ahead. The sun was high and merciless. The desert stretched endless before them, and somewhere out there death waited in a dozen different forms. But for the first time in her life, Eleanor wasn't afraid. She had a gun, a horse, and a teacher who killed men like other people breathed. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The desert had claimed her, was remaking her in its own harsh image. And Eleanor May Hutchkins, who'd once blushed at a man's casual touch, was learning to embrace the transformation. She thought of Big Jim's blood on her hands, of the bandit she'd shot, of the lies that had come so easily to her lips. Jake was right. There was no going back now. But as she watched him ride ahead, his dark coat billowing in the wind, his hand never far from his gun, she realized she didn't want to go back. The cage had been opened, and she'd discovered she had talons of her own. The education of Eleanor May Hutchkins had begun in earnest, and her teacher was the most dangerous man in 3 territories. God help anyone who tried to put her in a cage again. The Badlands Jake led them into were like nothing Eleanor had ever imagined. Red rock formations twisted into impossible shapes carved by wind and ancient waters into a maze of canyons and spires. The heat during the day was suffocating, trapped between the stone walls, while at night the temperature plummeted until her breath came out in visible puffs. They'd been riding these labyrinthine passages for 6 days now, and Eleanor's education had intensified with each passing hour. Again, Jake commanded, watching her practice drawing her pistol from the holster he'd bought her in Oro Grande. She'd repeated the motion hundreds of times until her hand was raw and blistered, but Jake remained unsatisfied. You're still telegraphing. Your shoulder dips before you draw. A man who knows what to look for will put a bullet in you before your gun clears leather. Eleanor gritted her teeth and tried again, focusing on keeping her body still while her hand moved. The gun came up smoother this time, but Jake shook his head. Dead again. You're thinking too much. He stepped behind her, his hand covering hers on the gun butt. Feel it. Don't think, just move. The gun is part of your arm extension of your will. His proximity made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Over the past days, she'd become aware of Jake in ways that disturbed her. The way he moved with economical grace, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the rare moments when something almost like warmth flickered across his face. She told herself it was just the isolation, the intensity of their situation, but when his hand guided hers through the motion, she felt something electric pass between them. Better, Jake said, stepping back, and Eleanor wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed. Now do it 1,000 more times. As she practiced, Jake prepared their meager dinner over a small fire built deep in a cave where the smoke would dissipate before reaching the opening. He'd been teaching her to cook on the trail simple fare that could be made quickly and leave little trace. Tomorrow we start tracking, he said, stirring beans in the pot. You need to learn to read sign, follow a trail. Man who can't track in this country is just waiting to be ambushed. You think they're still following us, Big Jim's men? Jake's expression darkened. Someone's following us. Found horse droppings 2 days ago, fresher than they should be out here. Could be Apaches, could be bandits, could be bounty hunters after me, or could be your friends from Carson Creek. Eleanor had noticed Jake growing more tense as the days passed, his sleep lighter, his guns checked more frequently. She'd caught him studying their back trail with an intensity that made her nervous. How many? She asked. 6, maybe 8 riders, staying just far enough back that we can't see them, but close enough they won't lose us. They're good whoever they are. What do? We keep moving, keep teaching you. When they make their move, we'll be ready. He handed her a plate of beans and hardtack, or as ready as we can be. That night, Eleanor took the first watch as Jake had taught her. She sat at the cave mouth pistol in her lap, listening to the desert sounds. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted. Small creatures rustled in the brush, and underneath it all she imagined she could hear horses' men's voices, the jingle of spurs. Her imagination, probably. But Jake had taught her that paranoia was just another word for caution in the Badlands. She thought about the woman she'd been just 2 weeks ago arranging flowers in her stepfather's house, pretending not to notice the way Big Jim looked at her during his visits. That woman seemed like a stranger now, soft and helpless and naive. The desert had burned her away, leaving something harder in her place. Eleanor flexed her hand, feeling the new calluses from the gun, the rope burns from handling the horses, the cuts and scrapes from climbing rocks. Battle scars, Jake called them. Proof of survival. A stone clattered in the darkness, and Eleanor's gun was in her hand before she'd consciously decided to draw it. Jake had materialized beside her, moving so silently she hadn't heard him wake. Easy, he whispered, but his own guns were out. Might be an animal. They waited tense until a kit fox emerged from the rocks, regarded them with luminous eyes, then trotted away. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Good reaction time, Jake said, and the approval in his voice warmed her more than it should have. You're learning. I have a good teacher. Something shifted in Jake's expression, a softness that appeared and vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. Get some sleep. I'll take the rest of the watch. But Eleanor didn't move. Jake, what happens when I've learned everything you can teach me? Then you won't need me anymore. Maybe I'll want you anyway. The words slipped out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a challenge. Jake turned to look at her fully, and in the moonlight she could see the conflict in his eyes. Don't, he said quietly. Don't make this into something it's not. I'm teaching you to survive, nothing more. Is that all? Eleanor moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. Because sometimes the way you look at me, you're imagining things. His voice had gone cold, distant. I told you remind me of Maria, that's all. The rejection stung more than Eleanor expected. I told you I'm not Maria. No, you're not. Maria's dead because of me. You want to end up the same way. Maybe I want to make my own choices about what risks to take. Jake stood abruptly, moving away from her. Your watch is over. Get some sleep. Eleanor wanted to argue to push through the wall he'd thrown up between them, but she recognized the futility. Jake Thornton had spent 7 years building his defenses. A few words from her wouldn't bring them down. She curled up in her bedroll, but sleep wouldn't come. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Jake's silhouette against the cave mouth, keeping his lonely vigil. What would it take to reach him? Or was he too broken, too haunted by his dead wife to ever let anyone close again? The next morning brought a tension that had nothing to do with their conversation. Jake woke her before dawn, finger to his lips, and pointed to the canyon below their cave. In the dim light, she could make out movement riders moving carefully through the rocks. 8 of them, Jake whispered. They'll find us within the hour if we stay here. Can we run? Not without them seeing us. Canyon's too narrow and they've got the approaches covered. He studied the situation with the calculating eye of a man who'd been in too many fights. We make our stand here. The cave gives us cover, and they have to come up to us. Eleanor's mouth went dry. 8 against 2. I've had worse odds. He handed her his rifle and a box of ammunition. You're going to cover the left approach. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target and make every shot count. We don't have ammunition to waste." As Eleanor took position, Jake arranged their supplies, creating additional cover with their saddles and bags. He moved with calm efficiency, a man preparing for violence like others prepared for dinner. The sun rose higher, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and orange. The riders below had stopped discussing something Eleanor couldn't hear. Then one of them called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Jake Thornton, we know you're up there. Come out peaceful-like and we'll make it quick." Eleanor recognized the voice, Dutch McCready Big Jim's foreman, the man she'd shot in the shoulder at the spring. So they were Big Jim's men, after all. "That you, Dutch," Jake called back. "How's the shoulder?" "Your bitch nearly killed me," Dutch snarled. "But Big Jim's dead thanks to her. We're here to collect what's owed." Eleanor's heart sank. She'd killed him after all. The weight of it settled on her chest like a stone. "Man got what he deserved," Jake replied. "Same as you will if you don't ride on." "Can't do that, Thornton. The boys and I have a score to settle. Besides, there's bounty on both of you now. 10,000 for you, 5,000 for the girl. That's enough to make us all rich." "You'll be rich corpses." Dutch laughed an ugly sound. 8 against 2, and one of you a woman who can barely shoot. I like our odds." "Your funeral," Jake said, then lowered to Eleanor. "Get ready. They'll rush us soon." Eleanor gripped the rifle, trying to control her breathing as Jake had taught her. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. This wasn't like shooting Big Jim at point-blank range in a moment of panic. This was deliberate, calculated violence. The attack came suddenly. 3 men charged up the slope while others provided covering fire. Bullets whined off the rocks around them, chips of stone flying like shrapnel. Jake's guns roared in response, and one of the charging men spun and fell, clutching his chest. Another cried out and stumbled, but kept coming. Eleanor sighted down the rifle barrel, tracking a man climbing toward their left flank. She squeezed the trigger and the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The man jerked and fell backward, disappearing behind a boulder. She didn't know if she'd killed him or just wounded him, and there was no time to wonder. She worked the lever, chambering another round, and fired again at a muzzle flash below. The attack faltered, the surviving men pulling back to cover. Jake had blood on his cheek from a rock splinter, but his hands were steady as he reloaded. "Good shooting," he said. "You accounted for at least one of them." "Jake, we can't hold them off forever." "Don't have to. Just have to make it cost more than they're willing to pay." He peered around their cover. "Dutch, you lost 2 men already, maybe 3. Want to lose more?" "We've got all day, Thornton. You'll run out of ammunition eventually." Jake cursed under his breath. Dutch was right. They had maybe 40 rounds between them, and the men below could wait them out. "There's another way," Eleanor said suddenly. "What if I surrender?" "What?" Jake turned to her, his expression fierce. "Absolutely not. Listen, I go down, distract them. You circle around through that gap in the rocks you showed me yesterday. Take them from behind while they're focused on me. They'll kill you the moment you show yourself. No, they want me alive. The bounty's probably dead or alive for you, but Big Jim's family will want me to stand trial, make an example of me. They need me breathing for that." Jake shook his head. "Too risky." "Everything we do is risky," Eleanor countered, "but this gives us a chance. Unless you have a better idea." Before Jake could respond, Dutch called out again. "Getting mighty quiet up there. You two having a lover's quarrel." Eleanor made a decision. Before Jake could stop her, she called back, "Dutch, I want to make a deal." "Eleanor, no," Jake hissed, but she held up a hand. "What kind of deal?" Dutch responded, interest clear in his voice. "I'll come down if you let Thornton go. He's nothing to you. I'm the one who killed Big Jim." There was discussion below, voices too low to make out. Then Dutch called back, "No deal. We want both of you." "Then you'll have to come get us," Eleanor replied, settling back into position. Jake grabbed her arm. "What the hell are you doing? Buying time, making them think we're desperate." She met his eyes. "Trust me." Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Jake released her arm and nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this together." The standoff continued as the sun climbed higher. The heat in the cave became oppressive, and their water was running low. Below, the men had settled in for a siege, taking turns, watching the cave while others rested in whatever shade they could find. Then Eleanor noticed something Jake had missed focused as he was on the threat below. Movement in the rocks above them, barely visible through a crack in the cave's ceiling. Someone was climbing down from above, trying to get behind them. She touched Jake's arm, directing his attention upward with her eyes. He saw it immediately, his body tensing. They were about to be flanked. Jake moved with liquid speed, positioning himself where he could cover both the cave mouth and the crack above. "When I start shooting, you run for the horses," he whispered. "Ride hard and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "Damn it, Eleanor." The attack came from both directions at once. A man dropped through the ceiling crack, guns blazing, while others charged the cave mouth. Jake's pistols roared, and the man from above crumpled, but more were coming. Eleanor fired the rifle again and again, lever action smooth now from practice, but there were too many. A bullet caught Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around. He kept shooting with his other hand, but Eleanor could see blood soaking through his shirt. She dropped the rifle and drew her pistol, firing at the shapes crowding the cave mouth. Then Dutch McCready was there, his gun pointed at Jake's head. "Drop it, Thornton, or I put a bullet in your brain." Jake hesitated, then let his gun fall. Dutch smiled triumphantly and turned to Eleanor. "You too, sweetheart." Eleanor kept her gun raised. "You'll kill us anyway." "Maybe. Maybe not. But if you don't drop that gun, I'll gut shoot your boyfriend here and let you watch him die slow." Eleanor looked at Jake, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't surrender," his eyes said. But she could see the blood pooling beneath him, could see how his strength was fading. She dropped the gun. Dutch's men swarmed the cave, rough hands grabbing Eleanor and Jake, binding their wrists with rope. Jake grunted in pain as they jerked his wounded arm behind his back. "Take it easy," Eleanor protested. "He's hurt." Dutch backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling. "Shut your mouth, bitch. You killed Big Jim. You're going to hang for that, but not before his brothers have some fun with you." Jake struggled against his bond's murder in his eyes, but a rifle butt to his stomach doubled him over. "Stop," Eleanor cried. "I'll cooperate, just stop hurting him." Dutch laughed. "Ain't that sweet?" The killer's got feelings for the outlaw. He grabbed Eleanor's chin, forcing her to look at him. "Big Jim was going to treat you like a lady you know, give you a home respectability, but you had to go and shoot him like a dog." "He was a dog," Eleanor spat. "And so are you." Dutch hit her again, harder this time. Stars exploded across her vision, and she tasted blood. "Enough," one of the other men said. "We need her in one piece if we're going to collect that bounty." They dragged Jake and Eleanor from the cave down to where their horses waited. Jake was barely conscious now, the blood loss taking its toll. They threw him over a saddle like a sack of grain, tying him in place. Eleanor they allowed to ride upright, but with her hands tied to the saddle horn. "Where are you taking us?" she asked. "There's a town about 2 days' ride from here," Dutch said. "Garrison's got a sheriff who'll be real interested in collecting those bounties. After that," he grinned unpleasantly, "well, after that you'll be the Carson family's problem." They rode through the afternoon heat, Jake drifting in and out of consciousness. Eleanor watched him with growing fear. The blood stain on his shirt was spreading, and his face had gone pale beneath his tan. If they didn't stop the bleeding soon, he'd die. "He needs a doctor," she said to Dutch. "He needs a noose is what he needs. But don't worry, we'll keep him alive long enough to hang proper." As evening approached, they made camp in a box canyon similar to where Jake and Eleanor had been hiding. Dutch posted guards and built a large fire, confident now that his quarry was captured. Eleanor was tied to a scrubby tree, hands still bound, watching as they dumped Jake unceremoniously on the ground nearby. He groaned, but didn't wake. "Please," she said to the man guarding them, a younger cowboy who didn't have the mean look of the others. "Just let me stop his bleeding. He'll die otherwise." The young man glanced at Dutch, who was sharing a bottle with his other men. "I don't know." "What's your name?" Eleanor asked softly. "Tommy." "Tommy, you seem like a decent man. Not like the others. You probably had your reasons for riding with Big Jim. But this, watching a man bleed to death, that's not who you are, is it?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Dutch said not to untie you." "You don't have to untie me, just bring me some cloth for bandages and I'll talk you through what to do." Tommy looked at Jake's still form, then at Dutch, who was now deeply engaged in a card game. Making a decision, he went to the supplies and returned with an old shirt. "Tear it into strips," Eleanor instructed. "Now you need to pack the wound to stop the bleeding." As Tommy worked following Eleanor's directions, Jake's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Eleanor, then at Tommy, assessing the situation even through his pain. "Easy," Eleanor said softly. "You've lost a lot of blood." Jake's gaze focused on her face, on the bruises Dutch had left. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, a promise of violence that made Tommy step back nervously. "It's all right," Eleanor said, though nothing about their situation was all right. "Just rest." As night fell, Dutch and his men grew rowdier, passing bottles and telling stories of what they'd do with their bounty money. They paid little attention to their prisoners, confident that two tied and wounded captives posed no threat. Eleanor tested her bonds whenever the guard looked away. The rope was new and tight, but she'd been working at it for hours, and she could feel it beginning to give. Jake was conscious now, though he kept his eyes closed, letting their captors think he was still out. Around midnight, when most of the men had drunk themselves into stupor, Eleanor felt the rope finally loosen enough to slip one hand free. She kept still, waiting for the right moment. The guard Tommy had dozed off against a rock, and Dutch was snoring by the fire. Carefully, Eleanor worked her other hand free, then crept to Jake. His eyes opened as she approached, alert despite his injury. "Can you ride?" she whispered, working at his bonds with numb fingers. "If it means getting out of here, I can do anything," he whispered back. She got him free, and together they crept toward the horses. They were almost there when a voice behind them said, "Going somewhere." They turned to find Dutch standing there, gun drawn, weaving slightly from drink, but steady enough to shoot. "You just don't learn, do you?" he said, cocking the hammer. "Maybe I should just kill you both now, save everyone the trouble." Eleanor stepped in front of Jake. "You do that, you lose the bounty." $5,000 ain't worth this much hassle," Dutch replied, pointing the gun at her head. What happened next occurred almost too fast to follow. Jake, despite his wound, lunged forward, knocking Eleanor aside. The gun went off, the sound enormous in the confined canyon. Jake and Dutch went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for the weapon. Eleanor scrambled for her own gun, which Dutch had carelessly left on a rock near the fire. Her hands closed on the familiar grip just as Dutch managed to throw Jake off. The foreman raised his gun toward Jake, and Eleanor didn't hesitate. She fired 3 times, each bullet finding its mark. Dutch looked down at his chest in surprise, then at Eleanor. "You—" he started, then toppled backward into the fire, sending sparks flying. The gunshots woke the camp. Men scrambled for weapons, shouting in confusion. Jake had managed to grab Dutch's gun and was firing from behind a boulder, but he was weak, his aim off. "The horses," Eleanor shouted, shooting at the muzzle flashes around them. They ran for the animals, Eleanor supporting Jake's weight. Bullets whined past them as they reached the horses. Eleanor practically threw Jake onto a horse, then vaulted onto another. They kicked the animals into motion just as the remaining men organized enough to mount a serious defense. They rode hard into the darkness, Dutch's men shooting after them, but not immediately pursuing, leaderless and confused. Eleanor led them through the twisting canyons, using every bit of knowledge Jake had taught her about moving through difficult terrain in the dark. After an hour of hard riding, Jake slumped forward in his saddle. Eleanor caught him before he could fall, pulling his horse to a stop. "Jake! Jake! Stay with me!" His eyes opened, unfocused. "Eleanor, you need to go. Leave me." "Never," she said fiercely. "We're partners. Remember, I'm not Maria. I'm not going to die, and neither are you." She found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang and got Jake off his horse. The bandage Tommy had applied was soaked through with blood. Eleanor used strips from her own clothing to reinforce it, trying to remember everything she'd ever heard about treating gunshot wounds. Jake was delirious now, mumbling about Maria, about Carson, about debts that could never be paid. Eleanor held him through the night, keeping him warm with her body heat, forcing water between his lips when he'd take it. As dawn broke, she heard horses approaching. Her hand went to her gun, ready to make a last stand, when she recognized the lead rider. It was Tommy, the young cowboy who'd helped her, and he was alone. "Don't shoot," he called, hands raised. "I come to help." "Why?" Eleanor asked, not lowering her weapon. Because this ain't right. Dutch is dead, most of the others are talking about heading to Mexico. Me, I got no quarrel with you. He dismounted slowly, pulling a medical kit from his saddlebag. My mother was a midwife, taught me some doctoring. Let me help. Eleanor studied his face, then made a decision. She lowered the gun. All right, but if you betray us, I won't. You could have killed me back there when you escaped. You didn't. That matters. Tommy worked on Jake with surprising skill, cleaning the wound properly, stitching it closed. Jake groaned but didn't wake fully, which was probably a mercy. The bullet went clean through, Tommy said. That's good. No vital organs hit, just muscle and blood loss. He'll live if infection doesn't set in. Thank you, Eleanor said, meaning it. Tommy packed up his supplies. There's an old mining shack about 5 miles north. Abandoned, but it's got walls and a roof. You could hole up there while he heals. Why are you doing this? Tommy looked embarrassed. My sister, she was forced to marry a man she didn't want. Killed herself rather than live with him. When I heard what Big Jim did buying you like property, well, maybe this is my way of making amends for not helping her. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. Good luck, ma'am. For what it's worth, I think you did right shooting Big Jim. Some men need killing. After he left, Eleanor managed to get Jake back on his horse and found the shack Tommy had described. It wasn't much, but it had a bed, a stove, and most importantly, walls between them and the world. She laid Jake on the bed and tended his wound, then sat beside him holding his hand. He was burning with fever now, tossing and turning, calling out for Maria in his delirium. She's gone, Eleanor told him gently, wiping his face with a cool cloth. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Jake's eyes opened, focusing on her with difficulty. Eleanor? Yes, it's me. You saved us. You're not like anyone I've ever known. Rest now. You need to heal. Jake's hand tightened on hers. If I don't make it, you will. But if I don't, you need to know. These past weeks, you made me remember what it's like to feel alive again. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Jake Thornton, don't you dare talk like you're dying. You're too stubborn to die. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Maybe you're right. He drifted back into fevered sleep, and Eleanor kept her vigil. Outside, she could hear the desert wind picking up, bringing the promise of a storm. They'd survived Dutch and his men, but their trials weren't over. Jake needed medicine, proper food, clean water, and somewhere out there more bounty hunters would be looking for them, drawn by the promise of gold. But as Eleanor sat in that ramshackle cabin, watching over the man who'd taught her to survive, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her father died. Not quite hope, but something close to it. She'd shot 3 men, now killed at least 2. She'd learned to ride and track and survive in the harshest land imaginable. She'd become someone her old self wouldn't recognize. You were right, she whispered to Jake's sleeping form. The desert does change you, but maybe that's not always a bad thing. The storm broke outside, rain drumming on the tin roof. It was a rare blessing in the Badlands, filling the cisterns, washing away their tracks. Eleanor allowed herself a moment of relief. They were alive, they were together, and for now they were safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. Jake would need time to heal, and they'd need supplies. The bounty on their heads wouldn't go away, and the Carson family wouldn't forget. But tonight, in this shabby shelter with the rain falling and Jake's breathing steady beside her, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground, fighting back, choosing her own path. And she wasn't alone. Jake had started as her teacher, become her partner, and now he was something more, though she couldn't quite name what. I'm not Maria, she said again, more firmly this time. I'm Eleanor May Hutchkins, and I'm going to keep us both alive. The fever broke on the 3rd day. Eleanor had barely slept, maintaining her vigil beside Jake's bed, cooling his burning skin with wet cloths and forcing water between his cracked lips whenever he'd take it. The abandoned mining shack had become their sanctuary, but their supplies were dangerously low. The rain had passed, leaving the desert washed clean, and Eleanor knew she'd have to venture out soon to find food and medicine. Jake's eyes opened clear for the first time since the gunfight. He looked at Eleanor, taking in her exhausted face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she'd worn herself ragged caring for him. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough as sandpaper. "3 days. You've been fighting a fever." Eleanor helped him sit up slightly, holding a cup of water to his lips. "Tommy's stitching held, but you lost so much blood." "Tommy?" "The young cowboy from Dutch's gang. He helped us, gave us medical supplies, told us about this place." She gestured around the shabby interior. "It's not much, but it's kept us hidden." Jake tried to move and winced his hand, going to his bandaged shoulder. "Dutch thought dead. I shot him." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jake saw something in her eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. The others scattered. Some went to Mexico, according to Tommy. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first, several times over." Eleanor stood busying herself with checking his bandages to avoid his intense gaze. "We're even." Jake caught her wrist gently. "Eleanor, look at me." She met his eyes reluctantly. In the dim light filtering through the broken windows, Jake could see how the past weeks had changed her. The soft, frightened girl who'd fled into the desert was gone. In her place sat a woman who'd killed to survive, who'd faced down 8 armed men, who'd dragged a wounded outlaw to safety, and nursed him back from death's door. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. The words seemed to break something in Eleanor. Her composure crumbled, and suddenly she was crying, all the fear and tension of the past days pouring out. Jake pulled her against him with his good arm, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. "I thought you were going to die," she sobbed into his chest. "You were calling for Maria, and I didn't know what to do." Jake murmured, stroking her tangled hair. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor pulled back, wiping her eyes angrily. "Don't make promises you can't keep. You're the one who taught me that nothing in this life is certain." "Maybe I was wrong about that." She studied his face, searching for meaning in his words, but before she could respond, they heard horses approaching. Eleanor was at the window instantly, pistol in hand, peering through a crack in the boards. 4 riders, she whispered, coming slow, checking tracks. Jake struggled to rise, but Eleanor pushed him back down. "You're in no condition to fight. Stay here." "Eleanor." "I said stay." There was steel in her voice that brooked no argument. "I'll handle this." She slipped out the back door before Jake could protest, moving with the silent grace he'd taught her. Jake dragged himself to the window, his heart pounding as he watched her circle around behind the approaching riders. The men were bounty hunters, by the look of them, hard-faced professionals who made their living tracking fugitives. They'd stopped near the shack, one of them dismounting to examine the ground. "Tracks are fresh," the man said. "No more than a day old. They're here somewhere." Eleanor emerged from cover 20 feet behind them, her pistol steady. "You boys lost." The men spun hands, going to their weapons, but Eleanor cocked her gun loudly. "I wouldn't. I've killed 3 men in the last week. Don't much mind adding to the tally." The leader, a grizzled man with a gray beard, raised his hand slowly. "Easy there, miss. We're just looking for someone. 2 someones, actually. Jake Thornton and Eleanor Hutchkins. $15,000 bounty split between them." "Never heard of them," Eleanor said coolly. "That's so because you match the description of the woman pretty well. Young blonde, pretty in a hard sort of way, and word is she's traveling with Thornton. Lots of blonde women in the territory. Not many who can handle a gun like you seem to." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Look, miss, we're not looking for trouble, but that's a lot of money on the table. Why don't you just tell us where Thornton is and we'll be on our way?" "And if I am Eleanor Hutchkins, you think I'd just give up my partner?" "Partner." Another man laughed. "That what you call it? Word is you're his whore." The gunshot was so sudden that even Jake jumped. The man who'd spoken clutched his ear, blood running between his fingers. Next one goes between your eyes," Eleanor said calmly. "Now, you boys have 2 choices. Ride on and forget you ever saw this place, or stay and fertilize the desert. What's it going to be?" The leader studied her, calculating odds. 4 against 1 should be easy, but something in Eleanor's stance, her absolute calm, made him reconsider. "You're her," he said finally. "You're the woman who shot Big Jim Calhoun and Dutch McCriady, among others. Where's Thornton?" Dead. Died of his wounds 3 days ago. I buried him out in the desert. The lie came easily to Eleanor's lips. So if you're looking to collect on his bounty, you're too late. We'll need proof. The body. Eleanor laughed a harsh sound. You think I marked the grave I left him for the coyotes and buzzards? The desert's probably picked him clean by now. The men exchanged glances. The leader said, The bounty on you is dead or alive, miss. We could just shoot you now, take your body back. You could try. Eleanor shifted her stance slightly, and Jake recognized the preparation for violence he'd taught her. But ask yourself, this is $5,000 worth dying for, because I guarantee I'll take at least 2 of you with me, maybe 3. Which of you wants to be first? The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Jake forced himself to his feet, grabbing his rifle despite the agony in his shoulder. If shooting started, Eleanor wouldn't survive no matter how good she'd become. But the leader made a decision. Mount up, boys. What? We're just going to leave, the man with the bloody ear protested. The bounty's not worth dying for. And if Thornton's really dead, that's 10,000 we can't collect anyway. He looked back at Eleanor. But we'll be watching, miss. You show up in any town within 100 miles, we'll know. They rode off slowly, and Eleanor didn't lower her gun until they were out of sight. Only then did she allow herself to sag against the wall, her hands shaking. Jake limped out to her rifle in hand. That was damned foolish. It worked, didn't it? This time. Next time you might not be so lucky. He touched her face gently. You can't keep risking yourself for me. I told you I'm not Maria. I'm not going to die, and I'm not going to let you die either. She helped him back inside, noting how heavily he leaned on her. You shouldn't be up. Couldn't let you face them alone. I handled it. You did. Jake sank onto the bed, exhausted from the brief effort. You've become everything I taught you, and more. Eleanor busied herself checking his bandages, which had started seeping blood again. We can't stay here. Those men will be back probably with more help. I know. Give me another day to get my strength back, then we'll move. Where? Jake was quiet for a moment. There's a place I know. Up in the mountains near the Colorado border. An old friend of mine has a cabin there. He owes me a favor. We could hole up there for the winter, let things cool down. And after that, Jake caught her hand. Eleanor, you don't have to stay with me. You've learned what you needed to learn. You could go anywhere now, start fresh. California, Oregon, even back east if you wanted. Eleanor pulled her hand away. Is that what you want? For me to leave? I want you to be safe. And you'll never be safe with me. There'll always be another Dutch, another bounty hunter, another ghost from my past. What if I don't care about safe? Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the harsh landscape that had become her world. What if I care about something else? Like what? She turned to face him. Like you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Jake's expression cycled through surprise, pain, and something that might have been hope before settling on his usual guarded neutrality. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? I've spent every moment of the last 3 weeks with you. I've seen you at your best and worst. I know you talk in your sleep that you can't stand coffee without sugar when you can get it, that you check your guns exactly 3 times before you sleep. I know you're haunted by your wife's death, that you blame yourself for not being there to protect her. Eleanor, I know you're a good man who's done bad things to survive. I know you're patient and kind when you're teaching, but ruthless when threatened. I know you've saved my life repeatedly, even when it put your own at risk. She moved closer to him. And I know that sometimes when you think I'm not looking, you watch me with something in your eyes that isn't just concern for a student. Jake looked away. You're young. You've been through trauma. What you're feeling, it's not real. It's just the situation. Don't patronize me, Eleanor said sharply. I'm not a child. I've killed men. I've survived the desert. I've earned the right to know my own mind. Even if what you're saying is true, it doesn't matter. I won't put another woman in danger because of my past. I'm already in danger. I have my own bounty, remember my own enemies. Eleanor sat beside him on the bed. We're both marked Jake, both running. Why do it alone? Jake looked at her, really looked at her. The afternoon sun, slanting through the window, caught the gold in her hair, turned her skin to honey. But it was her eyes that held him fierce and determined and alive in a way he hadn't seen since Maria. "You're not her," he said softly, and for the first time it didn't sound like disappointment. "No, I'm not. Maria was your past. I could be your future if you'd let me." Jake reached out his fingers, tracing the bruise Dutch had left on her cheek. "I'm broken, Eleanor. 7 years of running, of killing, of being alone. I don't know if I can be what you need." "I don't need you to be anything but yourself." She caught his hand, pressed it against her cheek. "We're both broken. Maybe that means we fit together." Jake pulled her closer with his good arm, and Eleanor went willingly, careful of his wounded shoulder. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing passion. It was a kiss born of desperation and loneliness, of shared danger and mutual understanding. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "This is a mistake," Jake said, but his hand was tangled in her hair, holding her close. "Probably." Eleanor agreed, then kissed him again. They stayed like that as the sun set, holding each other in the dying light. Outside, the desert began its nightly symphony of howls and rustles. But inside the shabby cabin, two damaged souls found a moment of peace in each other's arms. The next morning brought harsh reality. Jake's wound had reopened during the night, and he was weak from blood loss. Eleanor knew they needed medical supplies desperately, but the nearest town was 2 days' ride, and showing her face there would be suicide. "I'll go," she decided, packing their meager supplies. "You stay here and rest." "Absolutely not. Those bounty hunters won't be looking for a Mexican peasant woman." Eleanor pulled out items she'd taken from Dutch's camp, a serape, a wide-brimmed hat, materials to darken her skin. "You taught me to be someone else when needed. Time to put it to use." Jake watched her transform herself with disturbing efficiency. When she was done, she looked nothing like the blonde fugitive on the wanted posters. "Be careful," he said, knowing he couldn't stop her. "Always am." She kissed him quickly, then was gone. The ride to town was nerve-wracking. Eleanor kept her head down, her posture submissive, playing the part of a poor woman seeking medicine for her sick husband. The lie felt strange on her tongue, husband, but also oddly right. The town of Garrison was larger than Oro Grande, with a proper doctor's office and general store. Eleanor hitched her horse and shuffled inside, maintaining her disguise. The shopkeeper barely glanced at her as she gathered medical supplies, ammunition, and food. She was leaving when she heard the conversation that chilled her blood. 20 men, they say. Professionals? The Carson family's bringing them in from Texas. For 2 fugitives seems excessive. Samuel Carson wants Thornton bad. It's not about the money anymore. It's about revenge. And the girl? Well, they say the old man has special plans for her. Eleanor forced herself to keep walking, to maintain her shuffling gait until she was out of sight. Then she mounted up and rode hard back to the shack. Jake was awake when she arrived, and his face went grim as she relayed what she'd heard. 20 men, professional guns. He struggled to sit up. "We need to leave, tonight." "You can't ride. You can barely stand." "I'll manage. Help me up." Together they packed what little they had. Jake gritted his teeth as Eleanor helped him into the saddle, fresh blood already seeping through his bandages. They rode north toward the mountains Jake had mentioned traveling by moonlight. By dawn, Jake was slumped forward, barely conscious. Eleanor spotted a grove of cottonwoods near a stream and made the decision to stop. She got Jake down and into the shade, her heart sinking as she saw how pale he'd become. "Can't keep going," he mumbled. "Leave me. Save yourself." "We've been through this," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm not leaving you." "Eleanor, please, 20 men. You can't fight those odds." "Then I'll die trying." She gave him water, checked his wound. "You don't get to make this choice for me, Jake. I choose to stay." Jake grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Why throw your life away for me?" Eleanor met his fevered gaze steadily. "Because for the first time in my life, I have something worth fighting for. Someone worth dying for. And if that's not love, I don't know what is." Jake's expression crumbled. "Eleanor, no more arguments. Rest now. I'll keep watch." She sat beside him as he drifted into exhausted sleep, her rifle across her lap. The stream gurgled peacefully, birds sang in the cottonwoods, and it was hard to believe that somewhere out there 20 killers were hunting them. Eleanor thought about the choices that had brought her here. Every decision from fleeing her stepfather's house to staying with Jake now had led to this moment. She could have taken that stage to California, could have left Jake at any point in their journey, but she'd chosen to stay, chosen him, chosen this life of danger and uncertainty. The sound of horses made her grip the rifle tighter, but it was just one rider moving slowly, hands visible. As he got closer, Eleanor recognized him with shock. It was Tommy, the young cowboy who'd helped them before. "Don't shoot," he called. "I come with a warning." Eleanor kept the rifle trained on him. "Talk." "The Carson men are maybe 6 hours behind me. They've got your trail. Dutch had a cousin among them, and he's out for blood." Tommy dismounted slowly. "I tried to throw them off, but they've got an Apache tracker with them." "Why warn us?" Tommy looked embarrassed. "I told you about my sister, and, well, you two remind me of something. Love, maybe. The real kind, not the forced kind Big Jim was after." Eleanor lowered the rifle slightly. It's not like that." Tommy smiled. "Ma'am, I saw how you looked at him when he was dying, and how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. If that's not love, I'll eat my hat." Before Eleanor could respond, Jake stirred, forcing himself upright despite the pain. 6 hours, you said. Maybe less. They're moving fast." Jake looked at Eleanor, then at Tommy. "There's an old mine about 2 miles north, abandoned but defensible. If we're going to make a stand, You can barely sit up," Eleanor protested. "I can shoot sitting down." Jake's eyes were hard. "Tommy, you willing to help?" The young man nodded. "I'm tired of running with bad men. Maybe it's time I stood with good ones for a change." They moved to the mine as quickly as Jake's condition allowed. It was perfect for defense. Only one entrance, good sight lines, plenty of cover. Eleanor and Tommy prepared their position while Jake conserved his strength. 20 against 3, Tommy said quietly. "Not good odds." "I've faced worse," Jake replied, though Eleanor could see the lie in his eyes. "There has to be another way," Eleanor said. "Maybe we could negotiate with the Carsons." "They don't negotiate. They take what they want and destroy what opposes them." Jake checked his pistols methodically. "This ends today one way or another." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're planning to die here." Jake met her eyes. "I'm planning to take as many of them with me as I can, maybe enough that they'll think twice about coming after you." "That's not acceptable. It's not your choice." "The hell it isn't." Eleanor's temper flared. "You don't get to sacrifice yourself for me. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" Jake demanded. "Tell me, Eleanor. How do two people with prices on their heads find happiness? How do we stop running when the past keeps chasing us?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "We face it. Together. And if we die together. But we don't give up. We don't sacrifice ourselves. We fight and we survive because that's what we do." Jake looked at her, this woman who'd been a frightened girl just weeks ago, now standing before him fierce and unafraid. "When did you become so wise?" "When you taught me that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about having something to live for." Tommy cleared his throat. "They're coming, dust cloud to the south." Eleanor and Jake took position at the mine entrance. Tommy was on their left flank with the rifle. They had maybe 60 rounds between them. It would have to be enough. The riders came into view, spreading out in a semicircle around the mine. Eleanor recognized the type hard men who killed for money without conscience. At their head rode a man who could only be Samuel Carson's brother, his resemblance to Jake's description unmistakable. "Jake Thornton," the man called. "I'm Matthew Carson. You killed my brother. Time to pay for that." "Your brother got what he deserved," Jake called back. "He murdered my wife." "Your wife was collateral damage. She should have known better than to resist." Eleanor felt Jake tense beside her, his finger tightening on the trigger. She placed a calming hand on his arm. "And the girl," Carson continued, "Eleanor Hutchkins. She's got no quarrel with us except what she brought on herself. Send her out, and we'll make it quick for you." Go to hell, Eleanor called back. Carson laughed. Feisty. I can see why Big Jim wanted you. Don't worry, girl. We'll take good care of you before we hang you. That's enough talk, Jake said quietly to Eleanor. When I start shooting. We start shooting, Eleanor corrected. Together, remember. Jake looked at her one last time, and in his eyes, she saw everything he couldn't say. Then he turned back to the entrance, raised his pistol, and fired. The battle erupted instantly. 20 guns against 3, the air filled with lead and smoke and the thunder of gunfire. Eleanor shot with mechanical precision, everything Jake had taught her flowing through her muscles. Beside her, Jake fired with deadly accuracy, despite his wound, each shot carefully placed. Men fell, but more kept coming. Tommy's rifle cracked steadily, keeping their left flank clear, but there were too many. They were being overwhelmed. A bullet caught Tommy in the chest, spinning him back. Eleanor heard herself scream, but there was no time to help him. More men were rushing the entrance. Jake stood, both guns blazing, walking forward into the storm of bullets like he was invincible. Men fell before him, but Eleanor saw him stagger as bullets found their mark. Jake! He turned to her, blood spreading across his shirt from multiple wounds, and smiled. Remember what I taught you. Survive. Then Matthew Carson was there, his gun aimed at Jake's head. Eleanor didn't think. She moved, throwing herself between them as Carson fired. The bullet caught her in the side, spinning her around. She heard Jake roar, saw him shoot Carson between the eyes. Then she was falling, the world going gray at the edges. When she came to, Jake was holding her, his tears falling on her face. His own blood mixed with hers, pooling beneath them. Why? He asked brokenly. Why did you? Because, Eleanor whispered, her voice weak but clear, I'm not Maria. I won't die and leave you alone. If we go together. Jake kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Stubborn woman. You love it, she managed. I love you. He corrected the words torn from him. God help me, I love you. Eleanor smiled despite the pain. Took you long enough to admit it. Around them, she became aware of silence. The shooting had stopped. Were they all dead? Had Carson's men won? Then a new voice called out. This is Captain William Hayes of the Texas Rangers. Drop your weapons. Eleanor barely registered the chaos that followed. Rangers swarming the area, the surviving Carson men, surrendering medics rushing to help the wounded. All she could focus on was Jake's face above her, his hand holding hers. Stay with me, he whispered. Don't you dare leave me now. Same to you, she replied, squeezing his hand weakly. They were both fading, she could feel it, but they were together, and somehow that made it bearable. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. As unconsciousness claimed her, Eleanor heard one of the Rangers say, Get them to the doctor quick. These two are witnesses against the Carson organization. The governor wants them alive. But Eleanor didn't care about governors or testimonies or the future. All that mattered was the warmth of Jake's hand in hers, the sound of his labored breathing that meant he was still alive, still with her. She'd made her choice in that shabby mining shack when she'd refused to leave him. She'd chosen love over safety, partnership over solitude, a dangerous man over a peaceful life. And even now, bleeding and possibly dying, she didn't regret it. Jake, she whispered, I'm here. No matter what happens. I know, he said softly. Me too. The world returned to Eleanor in fragments. The antiseptic smell of a medical ward. The scratchy feel of clean sheets. The distant murmur of voices. Pain radiated from her side, but it was a dull ache now, not the sharp agony she remembered. She tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt weighted with lead. She's waking up, a woman's voice said. Fetch the doctor. Eleanor managed to force her eyes open, blinking against the bright sunlight streaming through a window. She was in a proper bed in what looked like a real hospital. How was that possible? The last thing she remembered was bleeding out in a mine entrance with Jake holding her. Jake! She gasped, trying to sit up. Pain lanced through her side and gentle hands pushed her back down. Easy now, the nurse said, a kindly woman with graying hair. You've been shot. You need to stay still. Jake Thornton, where is he? Is he alive? The nurse's expression softened. The man who was brought in with you. He's alive. though it was touch and go for a while. 4 bullets they took out of him. Man must be made of iron to survive that. Relief flooded through Eleanor so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes. I need to see him. Not yet. You've been unconscious for 5 days. Your body needs time to heal. 5 days. Eleanor struggled to process this. Where are we? Fort Carson. The Rangers brought you in. You're under protective custody, both of you. Before Eleanor could ask more questions, a man in a ranger uniform entered, his star prominent on his chest. He was older, with silver at his temples and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Miss Hutchkins, he said, removing his hat. I'm Captain Hayes. Glad to see you're awake. Captain. Eleanor's voice was hoarse. What happened? The last thing I remember. My men and I arrived just as the shooting was at its peak. We'd been tracking the Carson gang for weeks. They'd gotten too bold, too violent. The governor finally authorized us to bring them in. He pulled up a chair beside her bed. We found you and Mr. Thornton near death, along with a young man named Tommy Morrison, who thankfully survived as well. Tommy's alive. Eleanor felt another wave of relief. Barely. But he'll make it. He's been very helpful in explaining what happened. According to him, you and Thornton were defending yourselves against 20 hired killers. Eleanor studied the captain's face, trying to gauge his intentions. Jake has a bounty on his head. So do I. Had quote, Captain Hayes corrected. The Carson family's influence died with Matthew Carson in that mine. We've been investigating their operations for years, extortion murder buying judges and sheriffs. With them gone and their organization scattered, certain old warrants have been reconsidered. What about Big Jim Calhoun? I killed him. Self-defense according to witnesses we've found. Tommy Morrison wasn't the only one of Dutch's men willing to talk once they knew the Calhoun and Carson alliance was broken. Big Jim was known for his cruelty. No one's mourning him. Eleanor could hardly believe what she was hearing. So we're free? Not quite. There's the matter of your testimony. The state of Texas wants to put away what's left of the Carson organization permanently. Your testimony and Thornton's would seal their fate. And if we refuse, Captain Hayes' expression hardened slightly, then things might get complicated again. Old charges might resurface. New evidence might be found. He softened. But I don't think that'll be necessary. You strike me as someone who wants to see justice done. Eleanor closed her eyes, exhausted from even this brief conversation. I need to see Jake first. Then we'll decide together. The captain stood. Fair enough. Doctor says you might be able to visit him tomorrow if you continue to improve. Rest now, Miss Hutchkins. You're safe here. After he left, Eleanor lay staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. They were alive. The Carsons were dead or scattered. The immediate danger had passed. But what came next? Could she and Jake really build a life together, or had their bond been forged purely from shared danger? The next day, supported by the nurse, Eleanor made her slow, painful way to Jake's room. He was awake, propped up in bed, looking pale and drawn, but beautifully, wonderfully alive. When he saw her, his face transformed with a smile that took her breath away. Eleanor. She hobbled to his bedside, and he reached for her hand, immediately gripping it like a lifeline. They told me you were recovering, he said, his eyes roving over her face as if memorizing every detail. But I had to see for yourself. You took a bullet for me. You took 4 for me, Eleanor countered, easing herself into the chair beside his bed with the nurse's help. That's different. How? Because Jake paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I couldn't watch another woman I love die. Not again. The nurse discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. Eleanor held Jake's hand tighter, feeling the calluses from years of gun work, the strength that remained despite his injuries. You said you loved me, she said quietly, when we were dying. Did you mean it, or was it just the moment? Jake turned her hand over in his, tracing the lines of her palm with one finger. I've been asking myself the same thing. These past 5 days lying here, all I could think about was you. Not Maria, not revenge, not the past. Just you. He looked up at her. I meant it, Eleanor. God help me, I think I've loved you since you stood up to those bounty hunters at the spring defending a man you barely knew. That seems like a lifetime ago. It was. We're different people now than we were then. Eleanor nodded slowly. The desert changed us, stripped us down to who we really are. And who are we? She considered the question. Survivors, fighters, killers when we need to be. She squeezed his hand. But also more than that, we're partners. We're... What? Jake prompted when she trailed off. I was going to say we're home to each other, but that sounds foolish. No, Jake said softly. It doesn't. For 7 years I've been running, never stopping anywhere long enough to breathe. But with you even in the middle of the desert with death chasing us, I felt settled. Like I'd finally stopped running even though we never stopped moving. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Captain Hayes says we're free if we testify. The Carsons are finished. Do you believe him? I think so. Tommy survived Jake. He's backing our story. And with the Carson brothers dead... She shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at her wound. Maybe we actually have a chance at a real life. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to have a real life anymore, Eleanor. 7 years of being a ghost of violence and solitude. I don't know if I can be a normal man again. I don't want a normal man, Eleanor said firmly. Normal men buy women like property. Normal men stand by while injustice happens. You're not normal Jake Thornton, and thank God for that. You deserve better than a broken-down gunfighter with more past than future. Eleanor leaned forward, ignoring the pain in her side. Listen to me. You keep trying to make my choices for me to decide what I deserve. But I'm not that frightened girl who ran into the desert anymore. I'm the woman who shot Dutch McCready, who faced down bounty hunters, who stood beside you against 20 killers. I've earned the right to choose my own path, and I choose you. Jake reached up with his free hand, cupping her face gently. Strong, stubborn, beautiful Eleanor. What did I do to deserve you? You taught me to survive. You gave me the tools to become who I was meant to be. She turned her face into his palm, kissing it softly. And you made me feel alive in a way I never knew was possible. They stayed like that for a moment. Then Jake said, we should testify. Put the past to rest properly. Then we figure out how to live without someone trying to kill us every other day. Eleanor laughed, though it hurt her side. That'll be a novel experience. Over the next 2 weeks, as they recovered, Eleanor and Jake gave their testimonies to the rangers and territorial prosecutors. They told the story of Samuel Carson's murder of Maria Thornton, of Jake's revenge, and years of running. Eleanor detailed Big Jim Calhoun's attempt to buy her escape, the pursuit that followed. Tommy corroborated everything, adding details about Dutch's operations and the corruption that had let men like Big Jim operate freely. The remaining members of the Carson organization were arrested one by one. Without their leaders and faced with overwhelming evidence, most made deals to testify against each other. The empire of violence and extortion that the Carson brothers had built crumbled in a matter of weeks. During this time, Eleanor and Jake grew stronger both physically and together. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of their lives before they met. Jake told her about growing up in Texas, about meeting Maria at a church social, about the dreams they'd had before the war tore everything apart. Eleanor spoke of her father, a gentle man who'd taught her to read and write, to think for herself in a world that didn't value women's thoughts. He would have liked you, Eleanor said one afternoon as they sat in the fort's small garden taking in the sun. A gunfighter who led his daughter into danger. A man who treated me as an equal, who taught me to defend myself, who saw me as a person, not property. Jake squeezed her hand. I need to tell you something about Maria. Eleanor tensed slightly. Maria's ghost had haunted their entire relationship. I loved her, Jake said simply. She was sweet and kind and everything good in the world. But he paused, seeming to search for words. But she was fragile. She needed protection, needed me to be her shield against the world's hardness, and I failed her. Jake, let me finish. With you, it's different. You don't need my protection. You stand beside me, not behind me. We protect each other. Maria was my past, a gentler time that can't come back. You're my present, my future. You're my partner in ways she never could have been. Eleanor felt something ease in her chest, a worry she hadn't fully acknowledged. I was afraid I'd always be competing with a ghost. No competition? Maria's at peace, and I've made my peace with her memory. You're the one who brought me back to life, Eleanor. You're the one I want to build something new with. Even though I'm not gentle or sweet, Jake laughed, a rusty sound that was coming easier these days. You're tough as rawhide and twice as stubborn. You're exactly what I need. A week later, Captain Hayes came to them with an offer. The territory is grateful for your help in bringing down the Carsons, he said. There's a reward, $15,000 total. It's yours if you want it. Eleanor and Jake exchanged glances. It was more money than either had ever seen. Furthermore, Hayes continued, there's land available up near the Colorado border. Good grazing land, water rights, far from the troubles down here. The territory would be willing to sell it to you cheap, call it compensation for your service. Why? Jake asked suspiciously. Why make this offer? Hayes smiled. Because the territory needs people like you, tough, capable people who can handle themselves. The frontier's still wild, Mr. Thornton. We need folks who won't fold at the first sign of trouble. And you trust us, a gunfighter and a woman who killed her way across the desert. I trust people who stand their ground against 20-to-1 odds for each other. I trust people who choose right over easy. Hayes stood. Think about it. The offer stands. After he left, Eleanor and Jake sat in silence for a while. It could work, Eleanor said finally. A ranch? Somewhere to build a real life. You want to be a rancher's wife? Eleanor snorted. I want to be a rancher. Full partner. My name on the deed alongside yours. That's not usual. Nothing about us is usual. Eleanor turned to face him fully. If we do this, we do it as equals, the way we've done everything else. Jake studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, equal partners. He paused. In everything? Something in his tone made Eleanor's pulse quicken. What are you asking, Jake? He stood carefully still, weak but determined. Then to Eleanor's shock, he lowered himself to one knee beside her chair, gasping slightly from the effort. Jake, your wounds. Quiet, woman, and let me do this proper. He took her hand in both of his. Eleanor May Hutchkins, you saved my life in every way a life can be saved. You brought me back from the dead, gave me a reason to keep living. You're the strongest, bravest, most magnificent woman I've ever known. Would you do me the honor of being my wife? My partner in all things always? Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. You impossible man. Of course I will. Jake smiled that rare, brilliant smile that transformed his face. You sure I'm still a broken-down gunfighter with more scars than sense? And I'm still a woman with blood on her hands and a price on my head in some places. We make a fine pair, then. Eleanor helped him back to his feet, and they kissed, careful of their healing wounds, but passionate nonetheless. When they pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd have this again, he whispered. A future, hope, love. Neither did I, but here we are. They were married a week later in the fort's small chapel with Captain Hayes and Tommy Morrison as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple dress the nurse had found for her, and Jake wore his cleanest shirt. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Tommy, still recovering but mobile, grinned through the ceremony. Knew you two were meant for each other, he said afterward. Even Dutch saw it, though it made him mad as hell. What will you do now? Eleanor asked him. Captain Hayes offered me a job as a ranger scout. Figured I'd try being on the right side of the law for a change. He tipped his hat to them. Thanks to you two, I got a second chance. Don't plan to waste it. As autumn arrived, Eleanor and Jake took possession of their land near the Colorado border. It was beautiful country, rolling grasslands backed by mountains, a clear stream running through its stands of pine and aspen. They used part of the reward money to buy lumber and supplies, and with the help of some hired men built a modest but solid house. Eleanor insisted on helping with the construction despite the workers' shocked expressions. She could still barely lift heavy beams with her healing wound, but she could plan and measure and make decisions. Jake backed her completely, and soon the men learned to take orders from Mrs. Thornton as readily as from her husband. They bought cattle started small but with good stock. Jake knew ranching from his youth, and Eleanor learned quickly. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, building something that was theirs alone. One evening, as the first snows began to dust the mountains, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Eleanor had her head on Jake's shoulder, his arm around her. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The running, the danger?" "No," Jake said without hesitation. "That was surviving. This is living. It's hard work. Better than gun work." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "I got a letter from Captain Hayes today. The last of the Carson gang was convicted. It's really over." Jake tightened his arm around her. "How do you feel about that?" "Free," Eleanor said simply. "For the first time in my life, truly free." "And what will you do with that freedom?" Eleanor smiled, turning to look at him. "Build a life with you. Raise cattle. Maybe children someday. Grow old on this porch watching sunsets." "Sounds dangerous," Jake teased. "The most dangerous thing I've ever done," Eleanor agreed, "giving my heart to a gunfighter." "Former gunfighter," Jake corrected. "Now I'm just a rancher." "You'll always be the man who taught me to survive," Eleanor said, "who showed me I was stronger than I knew, who gave me the courage to become myself. And you'll always be the woman who saved me from myself, who refused to let me die in the desert literally and figuratively, who taught me that the past doesn't have to define the future." They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. Inside the house, a fire crackled in the hearth they'd built together. Their rifles hung above the mantel, retired but not forgotten, reminders of who they'd been and what they'd survived. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Eleanor traced the scars on Jake's chest, the old ones from his years of running, the new ones from the mine shootout. "Battle scars," she murmured. "We match," Jake replied, his fingers gently touching the scar on her side where she'd taken the bullet meant for him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run that night, if I'd married Big Jim like my stepfather wanted?" "You'd be dead," Jake said bluntly. "A man like that would have killed you body or spirit or both. And you, if I hadn't come stumbling into your life, I'd probably be dead too, or worse still, wandering, still empty, still running." He pulled her closer. "We saved each other, Eleanor." "You're my first," Eleanor whispered, echoing words she'd said in fear once, but now said with love. "My first love, my first real choice, my first true partner." Jake kissed her forehead tenderly. "Then I'll be your last," he promised. "Your last love, your last partner, the last man you'll ever need to run from or with. From now on, we stand our ground together." Winter came to their ranch with heavy snows and bitter winds, but their house was warm and solid. They spent the cold months planning for spring, for the future they were building. Eleanor learned to cook properly, though she was never as good as Jake, who had years of trail cooking behind him. Jake learned to trust in permanence again, to make plans beyond the next day or week. They received occasional letters from Captain Hayes, keeping them informed of the world beyond their ranch. The Carson trials had made headlines back east, being written up as the end of an era of lawlessness. Jake and Eleanor's names were mentioned, though Hayes had kept the more sensational details private at their request. Tommy wrote too full of stories about his new life as a ranger. He'd found purpose in the law he set away to atone for his years riding with bad men. One evening in late winter, as they sat by the fire, Eleanor said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about children." Jake looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Oh, would you want them after everything?" Jake set aside his work and pulled her onto his lap. "With you, yes. Children who'd grow up free, who'd learn to be strong and independent like their mother, and honorable and protective like their father. God help them with our combined stubbornness," Jake laughed. Eleanor smiled, then grew serious. "I'm scared, Jake. What if I'm not? What if I can't be gentle enough? I've become so hard." "You're not hard," Jake said firmly. "You're strong. There's a difference. And you're capable of great love. You've shown me that every day. Our children would be lucky to have you." Eleanor kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I think maybe we should start trying. For children, I mean. Jake's eyes darkened with desire and something deeper hope, perhaps. I think that's a fine idea, Mrs. Thornton. As spring arrived bringing new life to the ranch, Eleanor knew she was carrying new life within her as well. She told Jake on a morning when the aspens were budding and the stream was running high with snowmelt. He stared at her for a long moment, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests about her condition. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Our baby," Eleanor confirmed. "Due in the fall, I think." Jake set her down gently, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "I'll keep you safe," he promised. "Both of you." "We'll keep each other safe," Eleanor corrected, "the way we always have." As she stood there in the spring sunshine, held in the arms of the man who'd taught her to survive, and then given her reason to truly live, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate flight into the desert to this moment of perfect happiness, it seemed impossible, like something from the dime novels she'd once read. But it was real. The calluses on her hands from building this house were real. The scars they both carried were real. The love between them, forged in fire and tempered by trials, was the most real thing she'd ever known. "I love you," she said, words that still felt new and precious. "And I love you," Jake replied. "My Eleanor, my salvation. My Jake, my teacher, my partner, my heart." They stood together looking out at the land they'd claimed, the life they'd built, the future stretching before them. Somewhere in the past, the girl who'd fled in terror and the man who'd run from ghosts had died in the desert. In their place stood two people reborn through struggle, bonded by choice, and stronger together than they'd ever been apart. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth, promising growth and renewal. And Jake and Eleanor Thornton, survivors of the desert, veterans of violence, stood ready to meet whatever came next. Together. Always together.